Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about Carrie by Stephen King. And because this is such a well-known book and has multiple adaptations, this review is going to be kind of spoilery. So I'm going to try to keep the spoilers a little mild, but I feel like so many people have seen the movies and read the story that they kind of already know. So I don't want to really hold back too much, but I'll hold back a little bit. So, as usual, remember to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and let's begin. So, Carrie is probably one of my absolute favorite Stephen King books. I really like the book, and I really like the 73, I think it was, the 1970s movie. It's definitely my favorite version. And I think this story is probably was one of the things that triggered me into really liking things like telekinesis and psychic powers and stuff, and started my obsession with the King, like mostly the Stephen King multiverse magic system, the way it all sets up. Because as I've said before, I think about it similar to like the Cosmere, Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere, in that it all the magic flows from the same source. So theoretically, everything's connected. So I've always liked it for that reason. So let's go ahead and sum up the story. It's very straightforward. A young woman named Carrie, who was bullied most of her life, at ninth grade or so, like early high school, probably even later, she develops her period, her very first one, and because her mother is deeply religious and feels like all this like crazy stuff about it, because she's legitimately crazy. It's not even just because she's like deeply religious or anything. She uses religion as a smokescreen to hide her actual insanity. So she's like hasn't told Carrie anything about development or anything about life, and so she had no idea that this was going to happen, and she legitimately thought she was dying. But in the moment when this happens, her psychic powers trigger. Her telekinesis basically turns on. And the story basically goes from there. The people that were responsible for the bullying get punished, but one of the girls that was a part of the main ringleader of bullies, she legitimately felt guilty about the situation, so she wanted her boyfriend to take Carrie to the prom so that Carrie could at least make some decent high school memories. Oh yeah, if it's the prom, then that means it's at least 11th or 12th grade, so she was very, very late. The whole thing kind of more or less culminates with her going to prom with the boy, and the bad bullies that were, non-remorseful for the stuff they did and how they tortured Carrie basically set up a situation where they pour pig's blood on her in order to try to embarrass her when she wins prom queen. It triggers her absolute rage. She goes absolute ape shit and goes on a complete and total psychic tirade, killing a whole bunch of people. So that's basically the story of Carrie. That's the general synopsis of it. And I really hope most of you have seen the movie, at least seen the movie, because it's such a good story. It's so much fun. So I want to break the story down kind of chunk by chunk. I want to talk about some of the main characters that are more interesting to me and I think had a great influence on the story. So the book itself is actually structured quite differently than the movies. The books are just police reports and news articles and things. We find out about everything that happened after the fact. Some of these are like interrogations and stuff, and like Sue Snell is telling the police and stuff everything that she saw and all that kind of stuff. So we're learning everything secondhand. It's not even from Carrie's perspective, which in my opinion actually explains a lot of the directorial decisions of that 70-something movie. But first, let's start with Carrie. So Carrie White is a young woman who has been basically ostracized and compressed and like mentally tortured and abused her entire life by her mother. Her mother is insanely religious, and Carrie has to basically adhere to all of her rules, and if she steps out of line at all, she gets sent to the prayer closet, which is basically a bread pantry in their kitchen where her mom has retrofitted it with all this religious stuff, and she literally locks Carrie in there and forces her to pray consistently and constantly, which is an interesting detail because I don't really know how that would have gotten in the books. I mean, in the news articles and the police report and stuff after the fact, unless just a part of the when they go. Actually, the house gets destroyed, so I really don't know. So it's just one of those interesting things that is a detail that is basically mentioned in the book, but it makes more sense in the way that it's shown in the movie. So Carrie is overall a nice girl. She is a young innocent child, and she just wants to have like a normal high school experience, and she just wants to be happy and very normal. And she's a very, very incredibly relatable protagonist, because most people have been bullied at least at some point in their lives. Like, so everybody can easily relate to her and stuff, and you immediately sympathize with her because the way her mother treats her. So she's just a really good protagonist. And then when she makes that flip, you are still on her side because it's such a revenge tale at that point. You're like, yeah, get back at all the bullies that tortured her and stuff. So, but then you also feel kind of bad, like, because a lot of those people in prom didn't have nothing to do with anything that was going on, and they just died. So it kind of sucks. Definitely a tragic story, and Carrie is definitely a tragic protagonist. So Chris Hargens, I believe her name is. Chris is basically the ringleader of the bully girls who was torturing Carrie in the beginning, like who were making fun of her and teasing her and stuff. And she gets one of the, like, she's basically the focal point of the animosity from Miss Desjardins, from the gym teacher and I think like history teacher or something too. She gets most of the animosity because she was the ringleader for these girls. And so she also, like, as a result of being the ringleader, feels like she can't back down like all the other girls kind of are, because they're threatened that they can't go to prom. So she feels like she can't back down. She ends up can't go to prom, which is the beginning of the idea to do this prank on Carrie, which causes the rampage. So even as like just a character, I kind of understand her in that she's like in this high school position where you think at that time it's so important in order to keep her status as, you know, up on the top and popular and stuff. She feels basically obligated to be a hyper bully and to be real mean and stuff like that. And it's kind of like she gets fed by everybody else's reaction, but then when people kind of turn on her, she more or less turns on them, and then hyper sticks to her guns, and then it just kind of escalates from there, and it just never goes anywhere good. And then that kind of takes us to Sue. Sue is the girl who was also part of the group of girls that was bullying, but she's the one that felt true remorse. She asked her boyfriend to take Carrie to prom in order to help Carrie develop some fun memories of high school and stuff. And she legitimately felt guilty. I think she's like one of the cooler gray area characters, because she probably was like bullied before and stuff, so she was able to sympathize and empathize with Carrie. And she realized also too that like they're basically at the end of high school, and a lot of this high school popularity stuff just doesn't matter. So she just kind of was going through a whole lot of personal growth at that time, and it just kind of worked in that way. And she's basically the only survivor of the huge well, there's more survivors in the books than there actually is in the movie, but she's one of the survivors, and a lot of the story that we get is coming from her police report, her talking to the police and probably the press and stuff like that. So Sue's boyfriend, Tommy, is a very thin character. He basically exists as a focal point. He's just, you know, the guy that is supposed to help Carrie, you know, be nice to Carrie and all this stuff. But he actually turns out to be a nice guy and all this stuff. Especially in the movies, they very much make a point to show that he's a good guy, and he does want Carrie to have like a fun time and all this stuff. And he actually like has affection for her and all that. Like, so he kind of turns out to be a really good guy. And it just creates this entire situation of, dang, if only. Like, Carrie could have had a very nice run of high school experience, made friends and all this kind of stuff. And I think Chris, this is more apparent in the movies than it was in the books, in my opinion, but I feel like Chris had such an issue with Carrie because she saw how like pretty Carrie was and the potential for her to be normal and stuff. So she saw it kind of as a threat. So she wanted to make sure that there's always somebody at the bottom of the totem pole to beat on and stuff, to keep her position on the totem pole, basically. So I think that's where a lot of that comes from. But like Tommy, like, that's why I think Sue and Tommy like made such a good couple, because they both were basically at the point where they were beyond high school. They were maturing out of a lot of that stuff, and it just sucked that Tommy died by a bucket falling on his head and crushing his skull. So that really sucks. And I guess that takes us to Miss Desjardins, I believe is how you say her name. Probably saying it wrong. But she's basically the teacher and the gym coach lady. So because of Carrie bullying and all this kind of stuff, Carrie basically ended up making friends with Miss Desjardins, like her only real friend, more or less, as a teacher and stuff. So she was the one that was taking up for her and like looking out for her, and you know, administering the punishment to the bad girls and all this stuff. And I just thought she was an interesting character in the way that, like, it happens sometimes in real life. Like, adults will see that a child is being put through hell and they will try to actually help them and shield them as best they can, but without causing them extra embarrassment or extra torture because they have this adult taking up for them. So it's this interesting, like, balance beam kind of tight wire walk that she has to do in this situation. So it's just really interesting. But then let's go to the last character I want to talk about, and probably the biggest influence on the entire story, and that is Mrs. White. So Carrie's mom, as I said, is insanely religious for a lot of reasons, probably. And one of the things that we do learn is, like, she's basically been brought up in that way, to the point where even in her relationship with Carrie's dad, like, she knew, or, you know, her own head, she knew, like, sex and stuff was evil and it was wrong and it's a sin and blah blah blah. And she, like, she basically was weak and caved to her desires for the flesh. Like, she wanted to be Carrie's dad, and, like, Carrie came of it and stuff. And she like has this so much, like, internalized religious based guilt and hatred and stuff that she projected all of that onto Carrie, and telling Carrie, like, you're basically sin, you're going to hell off default and all this kind of stuff, and you basically, your entire life has to be scrimping and, like, groveling and just scraping, trying to, I guess, be seen good in God's eyes, or follow rules that are not even in the Bible and stuff like that. So she just was basically completely utterly insane and was torturing this girl. And just, it kind of makes me wonder if, because it is very much a Stephen King thing, that, like, you get powers through way of tragedy and stuff. Like in another story, Dead Zone, where a character gets psychic visions after a traumatic head injury. So it seems like the torture and all the stuff that Carrie went through is exactly what developed and unlocked her psychic powers. But had she, you know, lived longer, it probably would have been far more beneficial. So yeah. I guess I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up here. I've talked about pretty much everything about it that I really do like. And I do like the idea also as well. At the end, we kind of get a hint that she has pyrokinesis, not just telekinesis, because she shoots out, like, fireballs and blows stuff up independently. They kind of do that a little bit in the movie, but it's all still very much implied to be just telekinesis. And I just thought that was really cool for, like, Stephen King magic system, multiverse headcanon reasons. I'm like, oh, okay, is this the first instance of the shine that we see in his multiverse? But I think this kind of predates any idea of multiverse, so it's probably very rare. But who knows, actually, because Salem's Lot came out shortly after this, and that has connections, so who knows. Yeah, I guess I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up here. I really like Carrie. I think it's a great story. The writing is really interesting. The method and the way it's written is very different from King's typical stuff, and it's a really good story to read if you want to get a feel and a flavor for how King was early in his career. So I definitely recommend it. So have you read Carrie or seen any of the different adaptations or sequels? If you've seen any of the adaptations or sequels, let me know which one was your favorite in the comments down below. I'm curious about it. Mine will always be the 70s version. I just, the huge bias, first one I saw, and I just like it so much. So yeah, let me know about that in the comments. But as always, remember to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And I will talk to y'all next time. Peace.